previously, Sean and I had made a film about Bill and Bill and Peter's collection, and that had focused. It had a bit in it about the trilogy, obviously, but it also focused on Comrades, which was his last film, because that's the one that the moving cinema devices are in, the things you see in the collection. So I knew about, and of course I watched all these films, I knew about Bill's childhood, and also we interviewed Peter about that, and we interviewed Bill's sister, Helen, who lives in Australia. She happened to be in Edinburgh, and we caught her then. So, but Chaplin, I'd never read my autobiography until we started to make this, so I had not really, I suppose I knew that it had been a poor childhood. I did not realise that just how bad it was, I think, and also just how incredibly depressing, really. And his the unreality for him at the end, in the final section that we use from the autobiography, that he wants to go back to America, which is where his real life is, where his work is. And I thought that was a great place to end, because of course that's what did happen. You know?
Well, the irony was, in the end, during the McCarthy era, they stripped him of his citizenship so he couldn't go back.
At the end of the 52 visit, which we also saw, where again he's sort of mobbed in London, that was when the US didn't let him back in. The jaunty tone of the 1952 newsreel guy, and here he is, and everyone's happy, and he's delighted to be back in this place where the implication was he was so happy, and in fact he was the absolute opposite of that. He was absolutely traumatized by the place. He had the most terrible time. He was starving, right? This idea that he was having a happy nostalgic experience, when in fact he was having something much more like post-traumatic stress. I thought that was kind of a point worth making.
Yeah. And that footage of his London return, the two London returns, is extraordinary. Is it the 20s or 30s footage when he's almost sort of engulfed in the crowd?
That's
incredible.
The huge crowd is 21.
Yeah.
The shot of him getting off the train, looking a bit worried, is 31.
Yeah.
And then the 52 is the one we see most of, with the voiceover.
Yeah.
Because he had the benefit when he was an old man of not looking like Charlie Chaplin.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So at a later stage he could wander around the streets in Kempton and not be recognised until suddenly somebody said, "Ooh," and then the crowds would start gathering.
Yeah.
But I think he must have been very moved every time he went back.
I think so, yeah.
And I suppose in a way the same thing has happened to Bill, because all the scenes of his childhood have now been demolished. So although he filmed My Childhood, his autobiographical film, in the place where he'd actually grown up, it's all gone now.
Yeah, New Craig Hall is quite different now.
New Craig Hall has now got its own Elephant and Castle horror.
Well, the train actually stops at New Craig Hall now. It never used to. You used to have to go to Musselburgh and walk across the field. But yeah, it's definitely being gentrified.
And it was knocked down very soon after Bill made My Childhood, wasn't it, Peter?
Yeah.
Almost immediately. So he caught the very end of it, in the film. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And trying to find the places, of course, that Bill had filmed. That was the primary idea.
Yeah.
How tough was that?
There's almost nothing left. My God.
Yeah.
You'd think it had been bombed. I mean, it wasn't, but Lambeth Walk is particularly. Unless you knew that this, of course, it's still called Lambeth Walk. But unless you knew, it's just concrete everywhere. So, and the infirmary, of course, and
that was the hardest one to find.
Yeah. Oh yes.
It's still got the gateposts.
All that's left of the infirmary is just the very distinctive rectangular doorway. But yeah, it was just a lot of Googling basically, and wandering around using old maps.
Yes. Yeah.
But the irony is that we're trying to reflect. For those of you who've not read my autobiography by Chaplin, he goes back to Pownall Terrace every time he comes back to London. So that was 1921, 31, 52, and possibly later still.
72.
Yeah, then the footage of him in the Charlie Chaplin pub is 72. So he's obviously referring to different periods in his life. The longest description is the 1921 visit when he goes back. That was his first visit after becoming a movie star. And then we found over the period, I suppose this is just the way of cities and of London in particular, but even some of these places, even now, are no longer there over the last 3 years when we've been making this film. Most recently, I think last week, I just found out that the Elephant and Castle shopping centre is being demolished, which will include the Charlie Chaplin pub, that was the mid-60s. So even then, you see the newspaper clipping, Chaplin saying that he doesn't recognise the Elephant and Castle. Even then, it was unrecognisable, and it's a bit of a blot on the landscape, to be honest. I mean, that's why I like the elephant. But,
It's quite a mournful picture of him at the bar there.
he's not very happy, is he? So yeah, it's weird. So that's no longer there. So the film's kind of out of date already, which sort of, in a way, is kind of fitting.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, the only footage we have of Bill himself is this interview where he is wearing the Chaplin mask for part of it, and then he takes the Chaplin mask off, and they ask him some basic questions about his life and so on. So that's what we had. So, but the good thing about that was that it sort of gives you Bill and the Chaplin mask right together. So then that's what that whole mask thing is all about. And then we even found a shot of Fred in his old shop with the mask. There's a mask. I found a shot of and of course we filmed the actual set of masks. In fact, there's more than one. So it was possible to play around with this identity between Bill and Chaplin, and hope that would give some kind of structural underpinning. And then we had the time thing and the buses and the London footage to sort of take us through. And then we had the archive stuff as well. And there's a question really about how to integrate that. I think the thing the thing I was most happy to find was the Chaplin Carnival, which is actually right at the centre of the film, among the collection. And of course the collection, each image of Chaplin sort of commodifies Chaplin and makes him into this, takes him away from the human. and that result of his enormous fame, which is why there is all this memorabilia in the first place, seemed to be captured quite well by that Italian carnival.
Yes, where is that carnival?
I think it's Nice, actually.
Okay.
Nice. Oh, is it Nice? Are you sure? I thought it was Italian.
No, it's either Nice or Marseille in 1932, 33.
Yeah.
So we had to put that in. We saw this huge Charlie coming down the street with his camera. But the another thing that factored into the layering of the time, because Chaplin's looking back on several visits, we're looking back at Bill and Peter's footage, so it became multi-layered was the watchword. But also we only had the 100 feet of 8mm footage, so when I had become quite interested in references to cinema and pre-cinema in the trilogy, and I didn't realise there were these direct references to Chaplin. So we thought rather than just showing 287 Kennington Road again, we could just show stills from my childhood where Jamie's dad stops him on the street, and that was quite nice. And so it's kind of made sense to use the shots from My Way Home for the workhouse as well, because this was the one location that Bill and Peter didn't film, despite the fact that it's right next door to the infirmary. The entrances were on different streets, so that was just another way of adding to that layering of showing how Chaplin's influence seeping into the trilogy.
What happened to Chaplin's brother? Do you know?
He was a minor star,
Yeah.
wasn't he? He did quite well.
Yes, especially in this country. He starred in several comedies
I think he
and then became, in effect, Chaplin's manager.
didn't he appear in Limelight as well, or some of Chaplin's sound.
Well, a lot of the Chaplin
Yeah.
family appeared in that.
So I think he did. I think he had a pretty successful career. I think he predeceased Charlie. some years.
And there's another brother, isn't there? A half brother, Wheeler Dryden, who is.
Yes. Bill and I always had a theory, which I have now actually seen in a book, that Chaplin muddled up his parents. And that Charlie Chaplin Sr. is actually Sidney's father. And that Chaplin did have a Jewish father. Because Chaplin was often, by rather aggressive journalists, approached on whether he was a Jew or not.
Really? I
Did you know that?
No, I didn't know.
And he gave the most wonderful answer, which I remember quoting to Fred one day, who is also Jewish. He said, "I do not have that privilege." Isn't that a wonderful way
Excellent.
to put down something?
Yes, yes.
There's also these
Well,
things about whether Chaplin was a gypsy as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
You know, which did turn up in a Peaky Blinders episode. But this is so it's interesting that these different kind of ideas about who he is come in.
Yeah.
So that's
But
like
I was-
another kind of multi-layering.
Well,
isn't
I was
it?
quite careful to. I mean, if you notice, when the first time, the second time you see the hands flipping through the autobiography, one of the pictures is Hitler, or rather a still from The Great Dictator, right? And then Fred obviously fled Czechoslovakia with his family, which is why he's in the rag trade, which is why he has a piece of chalk, which is why he was able to write 3 and Charlie Chaplin Lived Here, which is why Bill and Peter were able to film it. So that's the kind of thing that it sort of turns on. So I thought that was...
But we only discovered that when you were already making the film.
That's right.
I just happened to be talking with Fred one day and talked about your making the film, and Charlie Chaplin Lived Here, and he said, "I wrote those words up on the wall."
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Immediately
Which,
got in
but
touch with you
this
and
is
you had
this is the thing. He could not have done so had Hitler not invaded Czechoslovakia.
I think it's worth commenting on the effect of the locations on Chaplin's films. There's no doubt in my mind that Metro Street with the liquor factory is in Easy Street. You've got almost exactly the same setup.
Yeah.
And when we were in the garret in Pownell Terrace, we were in the garret in The Kid.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
designed in exactly the same fashion.
Yeah.
That's why I put that bit.
And there's also this return, you know, like in the Attenborough film biography of Charlie Chaplin, Geraldine Chaplin, Chaplin's daughter, plays his mother, isn't it? She's a sort of
Yeah.
majority. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, you wouldn't be allowed anywhere near a demolition site these days. There'd be security people, and you know.
I know my assistant, Faith, who helped do some of the masking for the credit sequence. She was looking at the primary sequence, which is of the demolition, and the bulldozer comes into view with the guy driving it, and she says, "He's not even wearing a hat." Thus the view of 20-somethings level of health and
Those
safety.
carefree days before health and safety culture.
So thanks very much for Sean and Louise for showing us the film, which was wonderful. So thank you very much.